Good evening, everyone. Before we officially get started, we just want to make sure that you can hear and see us clearly by following the steps that you now see on your screen. To be able to type in any comments, questions, thoughts, please feel free to use the chat bubble icon. There'll be plenty of time for discussion at the end, but if something comes up that you'd like to make sure that we can see throughout the webinar, please feel free to type it in the chat box. The little box will appear right on your screen. This will not happen if you're on a smartphone or tablet. Just be aware of that. And to make sure that you can hear us clearly, click the little phone icon and use the call information that we provided for you or your information via internet on your computer if you choose to do that. Welcome to Rocks, Pebble, and Sand, a simple method of work-life balance. This is the third workshop in the Nature's Bounty Co-Wellness Series presented by St. Joseph's College. We are extremely fortunate and lucky to be able to have the generosity of the Nature's Bounty Wellness Foundation to provide this programming for us and for the community at large. So thank you to the Nature's Bounty Co-Wellness Foundation for doing that for us. I'm your facilitator. My name is Taryn Katusian. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement at St. Joseph's College, Long Island. My Director of Alumni Engagement, Paige Carbone, is also on the call as well to be able to interact with us and offer her insights and expertise as needed as well. And before we officially get into the actual topic of work-life balance, what I'd like to ask you to do is to really, as we go through this webinar, I want you to think about, as we're talking about these things, think about what work-life balance could mean to you right now coming into the workshop, and think about maybe towards the end of the webinar, things that might be new, that might be different, that might be questioning or causing you to question maybe your perception of work-life balance. So as we get started with what is work-life balance, so there's so many things that encompass our lives in any given day. And typically, when we think of the concept of work-life balance, there's so many different things at play, right? Look at the slide. There's work, there's your fitness, making sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family, whatever family that may be for you. I have rescue dogs. Some people have children. Some people have partners or people with disabilities or parents that they're a caregiver for. So there's many, many ways that we have families and the ways that we care for people in our lives. And that's something that's really taxing on us. Making sure that we have enough money to pay for all the things that we need and want, making sure that we're performing well at work and in life, right? So this is something that, looking at her face, it can be overwhelming really quickly. And it sort of becomes this concept that we have a perception of in our mind, sort of similar to something like networking or mindfulness, these sort of large concepts. And as we think about these words, mindfulness, networking, work-life balance, we start to create a perception of what this means. And not only do we create this perception, but our perception is affected by the things in society and the way we internalize other people utilizing work-life balance. So here's the perception, right? So the perception of work-life balance is basically that everything is sort of in homeostasis, right? Everything is in balance. You see on the left, he's got his work. It's completely linear. There's a nice straight line down the middle. On the right, he has his pineapple and coconut, and he's ready to just have a good time and relax. And he's got a nice, peaceful look on his face, right? So that's the perception. That's what we all aspire to achieve in our minds, that we think this is what work-life balance really is. It's sort of the full, complete equalness of both of these parts of your life. And by parts right now, we're talking about work and life, those kind of larger concepts, right? So what starts to happen is as we hold on to this perception and as we see this perception reinforced by things like keeping up with the Joneses and things like seeing family and other people project this perfection that you think they have, and you kind of sit there thinking to yourself, wow, how do they do that? I can't do that. I can't even get my act together for an hour. I can't even remember what I was supposed to do right now. I forgot the email that I started to type 5 minutes ago. So what starts to happen in our minds, we begin to internalize these perceptions. We begin to internalize these negative thoughts of feelings of inadequacy, of why can't I do this and I saw this person do this, or why didn't I just get this project done when I had all this time set aside? How come I can't just get it together, or how come I can't balance both of these things? So this induces anxiety, it induces stress. And what starts to happen is you really start to feel like everything you're doing is not really good enough, and it's not really contributing to work-life balance. So when that happens, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because then when you're internalizing these negative feelings, this anxiety, this stress, these feelings of I can't do this, I'm not doing it well enough, I have to try harder, then it becomes a really, really strong reinforcer, and it really actually prevents you from achieving the version of work-life balance that you want to achieve for yourself. And that's really what we're going to talk about right now. What is the reality of work-life balance? How do we actually understand it for what it really is? So if you look at this slide for a second, this is the close-up of a woven basket. So many people have seen these types of baskets. They're wicker. They're in a lot of stores, let's say Michael's craft stores, for example. And this is really the reality of work-life balance. It's an integration of work and life as it relates specifically and uniquely to you. So we understand this concept in other areas of our lives, right? We understand our uniqueness as an individual in areas like healthcare, right? Everyone's healthcare is unique and different, so there's not a one-size-fits-all medication or treatment plan or activity that will help people at large become healthier, right? There's no one perfect exercise that's for everyone. We understand this with learning and with education. There's not one size that fits everyone. Everyone learns a little differently. Everyone processes information differently, right? We're starting to understand this with body image and clothes and the concept of self in terms of how we physically project, right? All women, all men are shaped differently. So there's no one size fits all, right? There's no perfect pants or perfect shirt or perfect outfit that every single person can wear. It's just not that way. So when we think about that lens of uniqueness, of equalness, and we apply it to work-life balance, it becomes a little easier to understand in the sense that you're not trying to achieve a concept of work-life balance that's out there that somebody else has all figured out. Nobody has the magic secret to work-life balance. You have that secret within you, because the only way you can achieve work-life balance is based on your specific needs and your specific factors and how those things integrate into your day. Now, that might be different for you versus me, right? My work-life balance style, my cycle of working and not working and giving attention to certain things in my life will be very different than yours, because just like going back to that uniqueness, all of us have differently intrinsic needs and wants. And we have different priorities, and our priorities are shifting and evolving at any given time. So we really need to be mindful of that lens of integration as we kind of continue with this webinar and think a little bit more about what work-life balance could mean. And what starts to happen is basically when we internalize these perceptions, when we fail to see it as an integration that's unique and specific to us, then we start to pile on that feeling of inadequacy. Anytime we do anything, whether it's something really worthy of an accomplishment or something that maybe we could have done better with in any given day, and that's just because we're human beings and we're imperfect people, nothing ever seems to make anyone happy. This is sort of indicative in the workplace of someone who, no matter what they do, no matter how much they accomplish, they never seem to be satisfied. They never seem to be celebrating that accomplishment and actually taking in the fact that they got themselves to that point or that event or that program or they got their team to a different place. All of those major accomplishments kind of get lost and they get buried underneath all of these feelings of stress and anxiety and inadequacy. And part of kind of pulling yourself out of these feelings of inadequacy and stress is understanding that work is life and life is work. So this seems like a relatively kind of simple concept when you think about it. Okay, work is life and life is work, but let's think about this for a second. Let's sort of explore this. So when your email just can't wait, right? I know I've had this situation, like probably many people have, where you're at home, maybe you're relaxing, maybe you're not, maybe you're focused on the next part of your day, whatever that means for you at home, and there's an email or there's something that needs your attention, a phone call. When your email just can't wait, don't feel guilty about that. Don't kind of reinforce those feelings of negativity and say, well, why can't I just let this wait? And have that feeling that work is intersecting with life in a negative way. Work is life and life is work. There are times when you'll have to deal with personal issues at work, right? Like look at the slide on the right. So the person that gets the phone call at work. God forbid there's a phone call that you get where a family member or a loved one is in trouble or needs your help or there's an emergency of some sort. you're not going to turn around and say, no, I'm sorry, I'm at work, I can't deal with that, right? 99% of the time, it's something that you're probably going to have to drop everything and deal with. And we understand that in terms of our work life, that there are things that we constitute as emergencies based on our lives, based on the people involved in what we're doing and who's in our lives that we love, that we have to switch that gear in that moment. All of a sudden, when you're at work, it becomes about life. And that's okay. Sometimes that happens. Just like when you're at home, sometimes it becomes about work, right? There's that phone call or that email or something that you just remembered that you have to take care of. And when you think about it in this way, the only people who really do that are people who truly and deeply care about what they do in all aspects of their life because it's important to them. It's a reflection of who they are, and it's indicative of the philosophy and the values which they subscribe to, which carry them all throughout life and work, all simultaneously throughout the day. So when people sort of imagine work and life as separate, as, two completely separate beings and not integrated like we see in the woven kind of basket structure that we looked at in the slide before, this is where the anxiety creeps in. This is where the paranoia and the fear and why can't I just manage this? I'm so stressed, and those feelings of guilt. I'm answering an email when I really should be home paying attention to other things or vice versa. The reality is work is life and life is work. And the nature of work now in today's society, most people are working around the clock in some way, shape, or form, whether they're thinking about work, whether they're working on actual work at night, in the evenings. And to think about it, that's the way we are with our home lives too, right? Many of us keep in touch with our significant others throughout the day, or children, or family, or whatever the case may be. There's always an integration. And any attempt to sort of pull those pieces away from each other is an automatic key to not really getting the work-life balance that you need specifically for you. So this kind of brings us to the topic of the webinar, or the title rather, Rocks, Pebbles, and Sand, a simple method of work-life balance. But before we sort of start to imagine that with this analogy, we really should break it down, right? So here's the jar. This is really your time span, your life, right? So it's sort of encompassing the spectrum of your life, however long that may be. The rocks are the priorities. They're the most important things in your life: family, self-care, things that really, truly, intrinsically matter to you. The pebbles, the urgencies, or the small tasks. So this is where things like work come into play, your faith-based activities, other things that you're involved with in the community, things that are important to you, but if you needed to make a shift, you could with those particular things. And sand would be leisure, distractions, things that you might enjoy but that are not essential, things like vacations or, something that you might enjoy, taking a trip or something relaxing in that way, that doesn't take away from your priorities and your urgencies. And the whole metaphor, the whole analogy behind this, for anybody who's ever heard of that metaphor, is that when you try to put the sand in first, before the pebbles or the rocks, there's no room for anything else. If you try to put the pebbles in before the sand and the rocks, there's no room for anything else either. So what the professor who, this metaphor came from, the story that was told, he illustrates that you have to make time for the things that are your priorities. You can't fill your life with all of the small stuff, with all the distractions. If anybody who's heard that phrase, don't sweat the small stuff, that's exactly what this metaphor is hitting on. If you focus too much on the small stuff, if you put your urgencies ahead of your priorities, you're not going to have room for all of the things in your life that you should be able to enjoy, right? Because nobody is saying that your life should be only pebbles and rocks and no sand. When the metaphor is illustrated, the rocks go in, the pebbles go in, and the sand fills in all the little holes and gaps in between. And you have this complete jar that's a full composition of all of your rocks, your priorities, all of your pebbles, and all of your sand, so that you have a full integration of all of those three things. Now, this is also where that uniqueness comes into play, because I could have a jar, and a colleague could have a jar, and we could do that. We could fill it with rocks, pebbles, and sand in exactly the same way that the metaphor illustrates. My jar will not look like my colleague's jar, right? It's going to physically look different because maybe we put in everything a little bit, differently, but no two jars are the same. Just like no two people are the same. No two people's priorities and urgencies and leisure, things that they enjoy, no one is the same. So even if we're attempting to do this the right way, there's always ways for us to support each other and ways that we can help each other achieve an even greater version of work-life balance for ourselves. So there's a question that came in, do you feel like balance is generational? I think that's a really interesting question, and I'd invite any others, if you have thoughts or comments on that question, to type it in the chat box and let us know what you think while I answer. So in my opinion, I definitely think that the whole definition or how people view work-life balance is generational. I think that more people in, let's say, millennial generation, I'm a millennial, I'm part of that group, people tend to look at things like going on your phone or listening to music as distractions, as things to relax and things to enjoy. I don't really think millennials really start to understand the concept of work-life balance until they've really started working and they start to understand that there's no way to sort of go full steam ahead without having a give and take. I think it's something that has to be cultivated and learned over time, and I do think that in that way it's generational, because I think it's something that has to be learned. And I think it has to be learned through experience. It has to be learned through having those situations in life that we've all had, unfortunately, where our priorities just shift. It's like a switch that flips. And it's really out of your control in that sense, because the actions and the things that you need to do next are dictated by whatever's happening to you at that moment. And I think in those moments, that's where we grow as people. And that's where we learn to accept things that aren't always okay, like that perfect societal view of work-life balance starts to fracture, because then we start to realize, this is my life, these are the things that are important to me, it might not always be that way. So that's just my opinion. I'd invite others to implore your opinions, and thank you so much for that question. Let's see if anybody else had a question yet. Okay, great. So kind of going on that concept of uniqueness, of the intrinsic need, whether you know it or not, to already know how to achieve that work-life balance for yourself. Let's look at this picture. So everything that you need to achieve your own version of work-life balance is already contained. It's sort of like this flower that's getting ready to bloom. So each flower is not alike in that sense, right, based on where it's at geographically, based on the type of flower it is. Everybody needs a little something different. And as we begin to explore those concepts, as we begin to identify what it is that works specifically for us to not only help achieve that version of work-life balance for ourselves, but to silence that inner critic, I'm going to talk about that in a second, and to redirect some of the negative energy or negative feelings that your inner critic gives to you, you have to be able to kind of look past all those negativities and see the things that you're actually doing really well, which is hard for all of us to see, because all of us kind of envision ourselves as a hamster on the wheel. Like it's never good enough. We had 2 things to do. We had 10 things to do on our to-do list, and we got 2 done. And, we're thinking about the 8 things that we haven't done. We're not thinking about the 2 things that we've accomplished. Oh, here's another question. So what's your best advice for those of us who have trouble saying no and tend to take on too much? So I really think this is a part of looking at yourself. And as we talk about your inner critic, this is, I think, going to hopefully answer that question. So part of what Paige's question is asking about, for those of us who have trouble saying no and who tend to take on too much, this is what I say. I say let go. No, seriously, let go. So I say this from a position of, this is a work in progress for me. This is something that I continue to struggle with and cultivate on a daily basis. And this is something that is a constant concept that we need to reinforce to ourselves, even though it seems really simple, letting go, right? Letting go of all of those preconceptions, letting go of the things that you think are expected of you that really nobody's expecting from you besides yourself. People tell me all the time, I'm my harshest critic. I'm, my worst judge when it comes to, what I'm doing or what I'm not doing or how I'm managing my expectations of myself, because really that's what it comes down to. It comes down to managing expectations of yourself and allowing yourself to enjoy those successes to help silence that inner critic, or at least pause that inner critic, and begin to actually look at the things that you've accomplished and look at your life as it pertains to you, and understand that If I have to take a phone call at 8:30 at night, then I have to, because maybe I'm coming in at 10:30 the next day because I'm watching, my daughter's preschool recital. That's the up and down of work-life balance and the integration of both concepts. And when you think about nothing is ever really balanced, okay, so I want you to look at the image that we have on the screen. So this is someone who's doing a handstand. Now this is something, in terms of gymnastics, balance, you look at, the image on the far right, he's perfectly balanced, right? He's in a handstand. But when you actually think about all of the things that his body is doing simultaneously to maintain that balance, nothing is ever actually balanced for very long. His body is constantly working and his muscles are shifting and changing and things are happening in his body to maintain that homeostasis. Very similar to anything else, like a seesaw, right? A seesaw doesn't stay up. It has to move up and down. That's the equilibrium. The same thing like an ecosystem, right? Something like a pond or a lake or a river. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. It's never, ever in any kind of state of balance for very long, if it ever gets that way. And when we think about work-life balance, again, going back to that perception that we have to be perfect, we have to have everything figured out. We can't say no. We have to be able to do everything. Pulling back those layers of those expectations that we've put on ourselves and that we've projected on us from society and by watching other people think that they have their perfect version of work-life balance. Nothing is ever really balanced. And if it is, it's not for very long because things are always constantly shifting and changing and evolving. That's life. And your inner critic. So I thought about the best way to explain who this person is because I was thinking about, how do you really define your inner critic? It's a little bit more intense than, that voice that says, oh, you could look better, brush your hair, or, put a different shirt on. It's a little bit more intense than that. So your inner critic is sort of like when you think of, somebody who's an ex, right, that you don't associate with anymore, right, and you see them. You think of the person that you want to be when you're in front of that ex, right? That perfect person who has everything figured out, that nobody judges, that everybody loves, and you're so great because everything's wonderful, and why would life be any different? That person exists in your mind because that person doesn't exist. That critic is there to perpetuate those doubts and to sort of be there to kind of make you question things that you might otherwise feel really confident about. Now, inner critics are natural. They're part of every one of us. They're, the things tugging on our sleeves when we're trying something new, saying, oh, maybe you can't do this. I don't know. I'm not sure about this. I don't really know how this is going to go. So that's a natural part of life, right? It's okay to have some sort of apprehension, to maybe feel like something might not work out or to have some negative thoughts initially. But the inner critic can persist when you're reinforcing that inner critic by always selling yourself short professionally, by feeling like your definition of work-life balance or being successful at work is to take on everything, is to not say no, when really maybe for you a healthy balance of work-life is to say no, is to allocate priorities a little differently. Because when you think about quality over quantity, which is something I'm always a big fan of in my work, you have to take a look at that too and see, am I spreading myself too thin? Am I the kind of person who enjoys handling lots of projects? Am I the kind of person who can go to work all day and then go to 2 events at night with my family and get home at midnight and wake up and go to work the next day? Some people can, and good for them, and that's everybody's definition of work-life balance. That's why it's different for each person. Understanding that work-life balance will intersect. Let it go. Yes, Paige needs sleep. I need sleep too. Let it go, right? Look at the mother or look at the woman who's holding a child. She's on her iPad. She's looking at things. Understand that that's a natural part of life at home, right? We're usually doing many different things at once. And when we think about at work, when we talk about multitasking, most people feel like if they're multitasking, they're actually getting more work done. Chances are they're not. But when you focus on tasks or multiple tasks that mean something to you, that are actually meaningful and make a difference in your life or your family's life, let it go. Understand that work and life will intersect, and they need to intersect for you to feel good about being the best version of yourself that you can. For those of you who are on our first webinar, 10 ways to relax and raise your vibration, Jean talked a lot about energy and frequency and sort of redirecting some of that negative energy. So we're bringing a little bit of that into this workshop by this quote by Albert Einstein. So he says everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy. This is physics. Going back to that inner critic, that negative sense of self, if you're internalizing that energy and those feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, that you're not good enough, that everything you do doesn't make a difference, you always fall short, that is the reality that you will project to others. In the workplace, you will be seen as someone who cannot celebrate their accomplishments, who can't take pride or joy in the work that you've done to get to a certain point with a program or a person or whatever it might be. At home, you seem disinterested. You seem like you can't enjoy things because you're never really connected to anything. You're always sort of with that inner critic wondering what you could have or should have done better. And from Jean's workshop, reinforcing a little bit of that, when you have that negative energy, if you're someone who struggles with that, maybe all the time or maybe at certain points when things get really stressful, when things get too intense, do what makes you happy, whatever that can be. Preferentially something physical, something that will physically get you up and out and moving and just physically redirect your energy. Those of us in counseling and social work know cognitive behavioral therapy is extremely helpful. And by no means does anybody need cognitive behavioral therapy to do what makes you happy, but it's a concept of basically retraining your brain or reconditioning your brain when you're triggered by something or you get a certain amount of energy to redirect that energy into something positive and pour it into your passions. So things like listening to music, things like cooking, getting up and doing something physical for yourself. I know for me, that's always something I wish I could do more of or I should do more of, is get up and take a walk and refresh myself and just feel a little bit better, erase the board. Painting, writing, dancing, laughing, whatever it is that works for you. There's no one size fits all. I can't tell you what the perfect way for you to redirect that energy is, but I'm pretty sure that you can, because all of us have things that we enjoy. One of the things I do when I'm at work and I need to redirect my brain and my energy is I put on music and I get in a good mood because I'm thinking about what I'm listening to. Or, some people laugh or they watch a funny video on YouTube for a minute. Take that 5 minutes to redirect that energy, or take that hour and get your nails done, or get a massage, or enjoy things like that. Someone saying, I work on a dementia unit and I need to relax after work. Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but celebrating the fact that you just put in a really hard day's work in a unit where you're helping people. Thinking about all the things you did, big and small, to make someone's day better, to push a program forward, to make something better for a group or a person that needs it the most. A lot of times we're so immersed in the things that we do and the things that we haven't done that we really don't realize the impact we make. And this is why I know for me, I struggle with that. I'm so grateful to have my supervisor and colleagues around me who do a really good job of reminding me about my successes, and I try to do the same for them. So Amanda, thanks for letting us know you can't hear anything. Try to dial in by phone. If that does not work, please let me know, and I'll make sure that you can hear it. If not, we have this whole webinar recorded, and we will be able to provide you with the audio so you won't miss a thing. Remembering that you are enough. Take a second and look at this slide, because I know for me, this is very difficult. And so it's difficult for me. I'm pretty sure it's difficult for other people. We are always learning and conditioning ourselves to think we're not enough. We need to do more. Okay, we got 10 pages done. Try to get 15 pages done tomorrow. Or I got a B. Next time I'm going to get an A. There's nothing wrong with pushing yourself and motivating yourself to do better, right? That's what drives us. That's what makes us better as people and as professionals. But when you start your day feeling like you'll never be enough, feeling like from the moment you wake up, you're working from behind, you have to catch up, thinking about that perception and how, oh, great, Amanda, I'm glad that you're able to hear us now. Thinking about that perception and making sure that you're checking in with yourself in the morning and saying, wait a second, okay, I'm having a bad day, I'm in a bad mood, I'm going through something, but I got up. I'm taking a shower, right? Taking it step by step. I got to work, or I got to my family's event, or I did what I needed to do. And you know what? That's enough sometimes. Presence means everything, right? So the fact that you're on this webinar tonight, that's enough. The fact that you're listening, the fact that, yes, Paige, those small victories, right? So things that maybe you were able to help someone with something, you were able to, help your child with something. Yes, they can inspire us to do and be more, right? Especially, I don't know how many people have ever had this happen to them where something really insignificant that you maybe never have thought about could really mean something to you. Somebody comes up to you and tells you how much it meant to them, right? You never really know what the impact you're going to have on other people is. So really thinking about how people have impacted you and realizing that and thinking, you know what? The fact that I'm coming here with good intentions, the fact that I want to do a good job, I want to provide for my family, I love and care deeply about the people in my life, that's enough. That's enough. Celebrate your successes. You are a lot more amazing than you think. Think about the people you support, right? Think about the families that we provide for. Think about the people, the teams that we work with, the patients that we have, the clients that we have, the colleagues that we work with. We are somebody's hero at some point, whether we know it or not. And when we think about that, we have to, when we're in school, there's so much about how unique we are, how great we are, how different we are, how special we are. Something starts to happen when we get older. We sort of start to flip that, and we all want to be the same. We all kind of learn that we're unique and different and special, and then it becomes, you have to conform to the way this person works or that person works, so you have to learn to do things a little bit differently or better. But just like that uniqueness, the way you do it, the way you go about your life, okay, maybe you're not perfect. I'm not either. Guess what? Nobody is. Nobody has it all figured out. Not Beyonce, not Barack Obama. No one has it all figured out. It's a work in progress. It's a cultivation, right? And that's really when you open yourself up to that process and you understand the integration of work life, priorities, stress, distractions, helping it work with you and not against you. Being mindful of the fact that what you're doing is enough. The effort you're putting forward, the intentions you have, the energy, how much you care about what you're doing, right? There's so many people that forget how passionate and how deeply intrinsic they are to their jobs because they're so used to it, right? How many people just kind of get used to things and we forget? My friend, I see you writing about nurses. That's an excellent example. Nurses are some of the hardest working people on earth, right? And when you are kind of running through and doing all these things, it's very difficult to check in with yourself and remind yourself how great you are. But just like we tell our children to do that, just like we tell our friends and our families to do that, we have to do that for ourselves. Right? The whole concept of putting on your oxygen mask first, telling yourself you're great first, telling yourself you love yourself first before you tell your children, your family, your colleagues, your coworkers, remembering to check in with yourself and say you're amazing too. So we're going to kind of segue into the discussion portion, even though, we've sort of started to do that already. And before we do that, while you're thinking of things that maybe you'd like to type or offer up, I'd like to just let you know about the last workshop in our Nature's Bounty Wellness series. It's taking place on Wednesday, April 25th from 8:30 to 10 a.m. We have changed the location. It is still taking place at St. Joseph's College. It will be in a different room, and we will be sending everyone who registers the new location instructions, and we will definitely make sure that you find your way the day of the workshop. If you haven't already registered for this workshop and you're local to the area and you'd like to attend, please feel free to join us and register at sjcny.ticketleap.com/NB. This will be an excellent workshop. We'll have some really delicious organic parfaits, and we'll be talking about why that's so healthy for us to eat. As we segue into questions, I'd just also like to remind you that this webinar is recorded and it will be posted on our Alumni Video Vault. You can visit the Alumni Video Vault at any time to view any of the pre-recorded webinars we have, including Jean's webinar, 10 Ways to Relax and Raise Your Vibration. As we take any questions or thoughts, I'd just like to put my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions, any thoughts, if you'd like a presentation on this type of topic in your organization, or if you'd like to come to the college and have an event with us. We love to partner with anyone, especially community organizations. So if that's something that you'd like to do, please let us know. I would also just like to thank all of you for sharing, comments throughout the webinar. Pete, thank you for your great questions. Karen, we really appreciate your input. And we really appreciate the support for everyone joining this webinar series. We have many repeat people that joined us for Jean's webinar, so we'd like to thank you for signing up for that. We'll be sending a survey immediately following the conclusion of this webinar. You'll have until Monday at noon to view the webinar and take the survey for a chance to win a $10 Starbucks gift card. We'll be announcing the winner on Monday. We will be posting the webinar online by the end of the week, but for now, feel free to go ahead and take that survey when you receive it. Thank you so much. Enjoy your night, and I hope you had a chance to think about work-life balance a little differently. Thank you, Karen. If you have any questions or you'd like us to, talk, please let us know. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.